Connecta, which is in his 5th edition. Connecta, the seminars organized by the University of Lleida in Catalonia, in Spain. And today I will conduct this seminar, which will be delivered by Mats Pfeifer, which is a PhD student in the Universität Bamberg, and which is completely devoted to this theme of the collective consciousness and collective identities in the early Middle Ages, which is titled "What Does Burgundia Signify in the 10th and the 11th Centuries?" So, welcome everybody again, and dear Mats, you have the floor for 50 minutes.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction. And although he's not here today, I want to thank Jared Hostes too, because he invited me to take part in this format. And I'm very glad actually to be presenting my research to you today. And I'm hoping on a bit of discussion too at the end. Well, let's start. And I like to start with a source, concretely speaking, with Amatos of Monte Cassino, and in his account on the capture of Barbastro, a city in the northeast of Spain. I don't think I need to be more precise in this context of people. And in his account of this capture, Amatos provides insights into the composition of the Christian army besieging the city. He states, and I'm citing, "Therefore, a large number of men and a large knighthood were gathered from the French and Burgundians and others to fight together with the mighty Normans in Spain." In the abundant research on the capture of Barbastro, the involvement of Burgundian forces has become a certainty, basically, although the sources do not definitely confirm this, apart from Amatos' statement. Individuals have even been identified to whom participation in the conquest is attributed. However, one question has never been posed in the field of specialized research. What, or rather who, did Amatos actually mean when he spoke of Burgundians? It is evident that at the time, so the late 11th century, there were numerous dominions that were perceived as Burgundian, in addition to other geographical or historical references. It is therefore necessary to consider whether Amatos was referring to the inhabitants of the West Frankish Duchy, or alternatively the former Welf kingdom, which had subsequently become part of the Salian dominion complex. Furthermore, it is crucial to determine whether he was merely alluding to specific regions within these dominions, or alternatively whether he was in fact referring to a geographical Burgundia that encompassed both and potentially also extended beyond them. Amatos' statement about the participants in the conquest of Barbastro, who does not mention Burgundy or the Burgundians at any other point in his entire work, fails to shed any light on this subject itself. This raises the question of what Burgundy or Burgundian actually meant in the 11th century, or which area or kingdoms the Burgundian space actually comprised, and which groups of people, possibly also across political borders, felt and identified themselves as Burgundians or were perceived as such. The issue has been the subject of extensive research from a multitude of motivations, perspectives, and starting points. To illustrate, Maurice Chaume, the eminent regional historian of Burgundy in the early 20th century, sought to identify what he called a sentiment national for Burgundy that transcended temporal and spatial boundaries. Unsurprisingly, he was indeed able to discern such a phenomenon. In recent years, the question of a pan-Burgundian identity has once again become a topic of debate. For instance, Justin Favreau adopted Chaume's concept of a sentiment national that endured the Carolingian fragmentations and was rekindled under the Welf kings. Similarly, Brocard and Wagner proposed that a conscience identitaire existed throughout the early Middle Ages and beyond, persisting even after the incorporation of the Welf kingdom of Burgundy into the Salian Empire. In more recent times, Luther, a German researcher, also addressed this question in the context of his work on Burgundian bishopric networks. This was part of his endeavor to make a contemporary awareness of a greater Burgundian space that encompassed both the kingdom and the duchy more plausible. Consequently, one might assume that the answer to the question of who Amatus understood by the Burgundians would be clear. In fact, however, the recent discussion of this topic with Luther in particular has brought to light a significant issue that persists in the field of international research into Burgundy in the Middle Ages. Despite the growing emphasis on the need for modern historians to exercise caution when dealing with the ambiguous geographical and political term Burgundy and to recognize its many different applications, there has been a surprising dearth of discussion concerning the actual meaning of the term in the period under investigation. A comprehensive analysis of the complex nuances associated with the term Burgundy and a rigorous examination of the evolving conceptualization of Burgundy is conspicuous by its absence in the majority of these studies. Consequently, the reference to the inherent ambiguity of the term has become a mere platitude devoid of meaningful substance, and this is just one particular example that I'm showing from German research that is cited basically all the time when this question comes up. In the case of Burgundy, in the High Middle Ages, detailed studies of the so-called Begriffsgeschichte, the history of terms, such as those that exist for other names or regions such as Gallia and Francia, Neustria, or for example, the various names of the Middle Realm or Lorraine, as well as the Eastern Frankish Roman Empire, that would become Germany very much later on, have been sought completely in vain. At the same time, as previously mentioned, the concepts of pan-Burgundian identities and a greater Burgundian space are assumed and advocated in various contexts from different perspectives and for a variety of reasons. The current research is thus also and especially characterized by discourse and thought concerning Burgundian space and notions of Burgundian identity and consciousness or sense of belonging. These studies seek to utilize the findings of the spatial turn and spatial theory in general, for example, and investigate the constitution of a social, cultural, or power space that can be established through the various personal relationships or actions of the different actors in the space itself. Conversely, however, it lacks the absolute foundation that is necessary to enable a secure and purposeful engagement with this topic in the first place and to answer such simple questions as the identification of the Burgundians in Amatus of Monte Cassino. In order to do so, it is, in my opinion, first necessary to gain a basic understanding of the contemporary perspective on Burgundy and the use of the term. There are, however, some exceptions to this rule in research. Verena Türk, for instance, examined the perception of the Burgundian space during the 12th century, primarily through the lens of contemporary geographical descriptions found in historiography, treatises, and other narrative text sources. However, this excellent work has limited itself to a relatively narrow temporal and generic scope. While this approach was undoubtedly justified in the context of Türk's research objectives and questions, it is nevertheless deficient in that it fails to consider the immediately preceding phase in any significant depth. This is regrettable, particularly given the fundamental importance of this earlier period in understanding the later times, given the radical nature of the changes that occurred in Burgundy. In contrast, Laurent Ripard has recently addressed the question of the extent to which the Welf Kingdom was perceived or portrayed as Burgundian in great detail. His perceptive study, while offering valuable insights, regrettably fails to consider comparison with the contemporaneous situation in view in the West Frankish regnum or duchy, which is a crucial aspect that merits examination. Therefore, the objective of my presentation is twofold and clearly defined. The primary objective is to examine the profane and fundamental question of how and for what purposes the term Burgundy was employed during the period under investigation. In other words, which spaces, dominions, individuals, or groups of people were the term Burgundy or Burgundians used to describe and in what form. Furthermore, I will analyze any conceptual nuances and possible shifts in meaning. It is also necessary to examine the motives of the individuals or groups who used the term. For example, why was one dominion referred to as Burgundian while another was not? What patterns can be identified? Was this a deliberate act of denial or attribution of a Burgundian character, or was the use of the term simply based on the author's perspective? Does the act of labeling something as Burgundian inherently imply that it was perceived as such and vice versa? In conclusion, the potential implications of these findings for an overarching Burgundian identity will be briefly discussed, and the perspective for further research will be outlined. It is not the intention of my study to investigate social or territorial spaces constituted by personal relationships. This has already been done in an exemplary fashion in Turk's work, for example, and more recently in Luther's study of the group formations of Burgundian bishops. Instead, the emphasis should be on the conceptualization of a genuinely Burgundian red space, which can be apprehended in the diverse source genres. Rather than attempting to delineate the space cartographically, it is preferable to capture its essential features and thus providing a foundation for further deliberations. I will focus on the 10th and 11th centuries, which saw the emergence and consolidation of two dominions commonly referred to as Burgundian. The first was the West Frankish regnum and later duchy, while the second was the initially independent Welf kingdom, which later became part of the Salian Empire. The relative scarcity of sources in the 2 centuries allows for a comprehensive analysis of a significant proportion of the entire corpus of historiographical and diplomatic sources. Let's start with historiography. In earlier as well as contemporary narrative texts, both dominions were referred to as Burgundian. In the majority of cases, narrators from the empire or northern Italy as well refer basically almost only to the Welf realm and to this as a regnum Burgundia, and utilize the term Burgundia in itself to denote the kingdom and its region, its space, while employing the term Burgundiones to refer to the inhabitants of this realm. This is evident throughout the entire period under study in the works of Regino of Prüm and Dietmar of Merseburg, as well as those of Wipo, whose statements are of particular interest and weight due to his presumably Burgundian Alemannic origins. Additionally, the works of Hermann of Reichenau and Liutprand of Cremona provide insight into this era. This naming practice also remained common in the historiography of the 12th century, as evidenced, for example, by the works of Otto of Freising and his continuator Rahelin. In contrast, Flodoard, from a Western Frankish perspective, referred to the kings of Upper Burgundy as Rex Jurensis, Rex Cisalpine Galliae, or Jurensis, or A Cisalpine Galliae Rex, presumably in denial of the rule in Burgundy, which in his eyes was solely a part of the kingdom of the West Franks. So he was speaking about the duchy, basically. Nevertheless, his designation of Letald as Burgundiae Comes demonstrates that he was cognizant of the designation of territories to the right of the zone, that is within the Welf kingdom, as Burgundian. Letald's father, Alberich, had been granted the authority of account in the region surrounding Besançon by Hugh the Black, thereby establishing the basis for the hereditary county of Burgundy. Of course, Letald was also Count of Mâcon in the West Frankish regnum. However, the designation ascribed to him by Flodoard is more likely to signify his entire possessions on both sides of the river. Otherwise, it would have been more straightforward to simply refer to him as Count of Mâcon. This designation therefore lends further support to Flodoard's understanding of Burgundia as extending beyond the boundaries of lordships. Given Letald's frequent movement between the West Frankish and Welf courts, largely due to his holdings in both realms, and the relatively weak grip of Burgundian kingship in the region around Besançon, it is reasonable to conclude that Flodoard's perspective was shaped by these very circumstances. In accordance with the prevailing political circumstances, his notion of Burgundy was likely still influenced by the territorial and political concerns of local rulers like Letald in the 10th century, which frequently extended beyond the zone too. In the overwhelming majority of instances, however, Flodoard employs the term Burgundia or Burgundiones to denote the West Frankish realm, for example, when he reports on the coronation of Lothair I in 954, that this was approved by the Greats of Francia, Burgundy, and Aquitaine, and only refers to his ruler as Burgundian. He calls Richard the Justiciary, for example, Marquis de Burgundia, Burgundionum Princeps or Princeps Burgundiae. In the 11th century, Radulfus Glaber makes reference to the Welf kingdom and its rulers as regnum or reges Austrasiorum. In contrast, he refers to the Dukes Henry II and Robert I as Dux Burgundiae. Even when he refers to Burgundia as a landscape or the Burgundiones as the people, he appears to be primarily discussing the region that belonged to the West Frankish kingdom or its inhabitants. This suggests that in addition to the simple distinction between the two dominions, the explicit limitation of Welf rule may also have been a factor for him. Nevertheless, Radulfus makes reference to what he calls superiore Burgundiae partes or superiore Burgundia on 2 occasions. The latter reference unambiguously situates the monastery of Baume-les-Messieurs, which you can see on the map, within the boundaries of the Welf kingdom. However, in the former case, which chronicles a military campaign undertaken by Robert II of France amidst the Burgundian War of Succession right at the turn of the 11th century, is somewhat more intricate. Here too, Radulfus probably refers to the Welf Empire, or more precisely, the domain of the Count Otto William, who could lay claim to the duchy himself. The designation of areas of the Kingdom of Upper Burgundy as Superiore Burgundia or something similar is also attested in other sources from the early 10th to 11th centuries. For instance, the first continuator of the Fulda Annals at Regensburg employed this term to describe the dominion of Rudolf I of Upper Burgundy. Additionally, the aforementioned Florard employed the term to delineate the boundaries of the kingdom. The differentiation between a Burgundia superior and inferior, as observed, for example, in the Chronicle of Saint Benigne and other subsequent sources, is likely indicative of a delineation between the kingdom and the duchy too. Thus, it can be stated with some caution, to be honest, that the term Burgundia superior in the 10th and 11th centuries consistently denotes the territory of the Welf kingdom alone. In light of this understanding, let's take another examination of the concept of Burgundy as presented by Glaber in a whole. In contrast to the designation of dominions, this chronicler included areas outside the duchy in the larger Burgundia when discussing geographical regions or landscapes. When necessary, he also employed delimiting terms, as in the case of the Burgundia Superior. An example of contemporary Norman historiography should also be mentioned. Of the texts mentioned thus far, the Gesta Normanorum Ducum in their version of William of Chimiège provides the clearest illustration of the application of the concept of Burgundy to both the duchy and areas of the kingdom. To illustrate, Richard the Justiciary, Henry I, and Robert I are all designated as Burgundionum Dux and Burgundia, respectively, in the context of the succession disputes following Henry's demise. Additionally, the inhabitants of the territory are referred to as Burgundiones. On the other hand, the title Burgundionum Comes is also used for Reinhard I, the son of the aforementioned Otto William. Additionally, the author refers to the homeland of this figure as Burgundia. At the beginning of the chapter, which immediately follows the description of the War of Succession, William also mentions Reinhard as the Transone Fluvium Burgundionum Comes, which was undoubtedly intended to serve to distinguish this from the preceding account and to obviate any potential confusion between the two realms. This bears eloquent testimony to William's concept of Burgundy, or rather the concept of Burgundy that he presupposed among his readers. Finally, let us take another look at the application in Burgundy itself. Only texts written in the duchy can be analyzed here, as no relevant contemporary historiographical texts have survived from the territory of the kingdom. In particular, the Chronicle of Saint Benigne from Dijon, written between 1058 and 78, is used here. The chronicle, which survives today in an 11th century manuscript together with a cartulary of the abbey, presents the history of the abbey within the context of universal history. This results in a clear focus on the Burgundian region and its rulers, who were the benefactors of the abbey. The term Burgundia is used in a clear and consistent manner throughout. Primarily, the kingdoms of the Burgundians themselves and the Merovingian kingdom of Burgundy were called Burgundia or Regnum Burgundiae. The fact that a large-scale Burgundian term is to be expected later on, which includes both the duchy and the Kingdom of Burgundy, is already discernible in the description of the division of Louis the Pierce's realm among his sons. It is recorded there that Lothair received not only the Regnum Italia and the portion of Francia situated between the Moselle and Rhine, but also Partem Burgundiae. Charles the Bald, on the other hand, was granted Francia, Burgundia, and Neustria. In a number of instances, the territory of the duchy is referred to as Burgundia as well. Moreover, Richard the Justiciary is once again referred to as Dux, while Giselbert, who ruled over several counties west of the Saône, is referred to as Comes Burgundiae. Otherwise, however, the dukes, like the counts of Burgundy, Otto William and his son Reinhard, are only given the simple title of duke or count without any addition. In contrast, the term Ducatus Burgundiae is used on 2 occasions in the context of a kind of summary of the succession of rule in the duchy. It is recorded that Otto, the son of Hugh Magnus, took over the Ducatus of Burgundy, which the aforementioned Giselbert would have held after Hugh the Black. The latter's territory, which is also included areas east of the Saône, is also described as Burgundia, which indicates that the kingdom was already included in the author's concept of Burgundy. A quite comparable account of Henry III's succession in the kingdom of Upper Burgundy describes it as the Burgundia Regnum or Regnum Burgundiae, with Rudolf III and Conrad III also identified as Burgundiae Rex. This overview of the historiographical sources thus permits 2 conclusions to be drawn. Firstly, apart from the fundamental question of whether a duchy and kingdom or county are reported on at all in the various texts, the position and perspective of the respective authors is unsurprisingly decisive, especially with regard to the naming of the rulers and the realm they ruled. In addition to the question of the importance of the 2 domains, which explains, for example, the concentration of the northern Alpine historians on the kingdom, or the rejection of a Burgundian character of the same in Radulfus Glaber's work, views on the politics of rule also play an important role. To illustrate the designation of the Burgundian kings as reges austratiorum by Flodoard and Radulfus is likely to have been influenced not only by simple distinction between 2 dominions, but also by the explicit restriction of wealth rule to the eastern part and not the part of the geographical Burgundia belonging to the kingdom of the Western Franks or France. Conversely, William of Jumièges' broad concept of Burgundy, which encompasses both the duchy and the county, can be attributed, at least in part, to the fact that both played a pivotal role in the historical trajectory of the contemporary Norman dukes and consequently in William's oeuvre too. This is evidenced by their involvement in the succession conflict within the duchy on the one hand and the matrimonial union of Count Reinhard with Adelaide, daughter of the Norman Duke Richard II, on the other. This can also be observed in the variant he selected to differentiate Reinhard from the Duke, designating him as Transsohn Fluvium Burgundionum Comes. Unlike in Radulfus' case, this was probably only intended to distinguish Reinhard and not to devalue him in any way, as is shown by the acknowledgement of his Burgundian character. William thus acknowledges the designation of political entities within the Welf kingdom as Burgundian, but limits this to the county, which was the sole relevant political entity in their account due to the familial and political ties. Nevertheless, an examination of the term Burgundia in its purely geographical context reveals a different, more homogeneous picture. A review of the extant texts that deal with areas of both dominions reveals that all the sources analyzed locate places or areas of both kingdoms within the purely geographical landscape of Burgundia. This comprehensive use of the term is particularly evident again in the work of William of Jumièges, who makes reference to both dominions within a single chapter. It can thus be concluded that both the duchy and the kingdom could be perceived as Burgundian independently of each other in the 10th as well as the 11th centuries. Furthermore, it was possible to subsume both territories under the larger geographical area of Burgundia, which transcended political boundaries. This allowed for the inhabitants of both territories to be referred to as Burgundiones without distinction. The polyvalent conceptual systems of contemporary historiography thus reveal a dual character of the Burgundian term used, which can be divided into the two categories of an administrative political unit and a historical geographical designation. In the case of the former, an endeavor to make a clear distinction can generally be recognized, which could involve the creation of new pairs of terms, as in the case of the Burgundia Superior, or the denial of the Burgundian character of a political entity. In contrast, no clear demarcation seems to have been made or intended in other cases. Instead, consciously or unconsciously, an undefined and dynamic term was used, which the addressees were able to fill according to their own knowledge. It can be inferred that, particularly in instances where the terms Burgundia or Burgundiones are employed in an overarching, unspecified manner, their precise meaning must be ascertained on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the author and the event under discussion. Nevertheless, in many cases, particularly in shorter notes, this will remain unclear, as it is challenging actually to formulate a strict, universally valid rule. For instance, it is not a given that a West Frankish source must invariably refer solely to the duchy and vice versa, as evidenced by the examples I presented. In addition, the impact of the diverse cross-border networks of the authors themselves and the subjects and occurrences they address must be considered. For instance, the influence of networks involving the Counts Letald or Otto William, as well as the monasteries of Cluny and Saint-Benigne in Dijon, on both sides of the zone must be taken into account there. Let's turn to the diplomatic sources. The self-designation and the foreign designation of the rulers of the Kingdom of Upper Burgundy in documentary sources have already been the subject of extensive research, which is why a few brief remarks will suffice here. Ripard and also from Germany, Karl Richard Brühl identified 5 documents from the late 10th and early 11th centuries in which the Welf kings are referred to as Rex Burgundionum or something similar. This practice continued and intensified actually under the Salian kings. Consequently, Henry III is already referred to as Rex Burgundionum in 2 of his father's charters. During his period of independent rule, the well-known triple formula is found, in which Henry appears as Rex Invictissimus Teutonicorum Tertii Secundi Romanorum Imperatoris Augusti Burgundionum Primi. Accordingly, Henry's chancellor in Burgundy, Hugh of Besançon, is on one occasion described as Burgundionum Archicancellarius. It would appear that the title of Rex Burgundionum is never ascribed to Henry IV. Indeed, he was not fully recognized in the Kingdom of Burgundy until he assumed his independent rule in 1065. This is evidenced not only in his own documents, but also in those of others. In contrast, the Burgundian title of Chancellor for Ermenfried of Sion is once again documented from 1082, this time in a territorial form, which is quite remarkable. Furthermore, the designation of the kingdom ruled by Henry as Burgundian also continues to appear sporadically in other diplomatic sources from other people. In private charters from the Transjuranian region, the Viennois and Lyonnais, dated after the reign of the respective kings, Ripard was able to identify only a single case from Savigny for the Welf period, in which a Rex in Burgundia is mentioned, but also found that this formulation became increasingly prevalent from the Salian period onwards. With the exception of 1 charter from Savigny, 4 out of 12 charters from Saint-Maurice d'Agon and Sion are dated after the reign in Burgundy. The designation King of Burgundy or King of the Burgundians thus became increasingly established after its first appearance at the turn of the 11th century. This is evident in the documents of the rulers themselves and in the dating lines of Burgundian private documents. During the earlier Salian period, the designation could be described as either the rule or at least common. However, it disappeared again under Henry IV. Nevertheless, roles pertaining to the kingdom, such as that of Chancellor, persisted in being designated as Burgundian. The situation is considerably more complex and ambiguous with regard to the appearance and dissemination of the title of a Count of Burgundy, which is, of course, commonly used in research without any kind of reflection, mostly. As has been demonstrated, Lethald, Otto William, and his son Reinhard were all referred to as Counts of Burgundy in one form or another in a variety of narrative sources. Indeed, the designation for Lethald is also substantiated by documental evidence. In 955, he is documented in a precept of the West Frankish king Lothair as Leothaldus Burgundiae Comes. It is also important to note that in the 10th century, rulers in the West Frankish regnum could bear the title of Count of Burgundy concurrently with other titles. To illustrate, Giselbert, I mentioned him already, who unified several counties west of the Saône that had previously been held by Hugh the Black, is documented as Burgundiae Comes Principus at almost the same time as Lethald at the end of 954. The document confirms a donation of a number of estates situated remarkably in Pago Burgundiae, which is subsequently specified as the territories of the counties of Beaune and Chalon, both of which are located in the territory of the Duchy or the West Frankish Regnum of Burgundy. This observation is also confirmed for Giselbert in narrative texts where evidence for these or similar designations can be found. In one case, Richard the Justiciary had already described himself as Comes et Dux, which could be considered a potential model for Giselbert. It can therefore be surmised that the designation of Giselbert as Burgundiae Comes is most likely to refer to the fact that he, like Richard before him, united several counties within the West Frankish Regnum of Burgundy in his hands. It seems reasonable to me to conclude that the designation was used for counts who had united several counties in Burgundia, whether these were located in the duchy or in the kingdom, which, as we have seen, was also clearly perceived as Burgundian. If the addition of Burgundy had solely pertained to territories within the duchy, a more circumscribed designation as Counts of Mâcon, for example, would have been feasible and anticipated for Count Lethald at least. To the best of my knowledge, the title is not documented for other counts within the duchy. It seems highly improbable that the possessions in the kingdom would have provided the rationale for the overarching designation, yet not the name itself. This interpretation is also contradicted by the usage in the aforementioned narrative sources, some of which explicitly refer to the territories of the kingdom. In light of the scarcity of documentary evidence in this period, coupled with the continued prevalence of the simple title of count with any territorial or ethnic addition, it is nevertheless important and prudent to refrain from unduly emphasizing these considerations. To illustrate, Hugh the Black, who occupied the analogous role in the West Frankish Regnum between Richard and Giselbert, does not seem to have been designated as Count of Burgundy at any point. For Otto William, the designation as Count of Burgundy is only attested in a document of the Bishop of Toul in the Cartulary of Saint-Benigni. Additionally, the necrology of the Bishop of Langres, who died in 1016, makes reference to the assistance provided by the Comes Burgundiae Ottone Wilhelmo Cognomine. As with Lethald, it is possible that the title in question may have referred to the entire possessions of Otto William, regardless of their location east or west of the Saône. I am not aware, however, of any documentary tradition referring to his son Reinhard as Count of Burgundy. He always appears with the simple title of Count without any further attribution. This may also be a contributing factor to the absence of the Burgundian title of Count in the Chronicle of Saint-Benigni, which relies very heavily on documentary texts and in some cases even provides extracts or summaries of individual documents. However, given the rarity of any Burgundian addition to the Count title, as I said, and the fact that all the Counts of Burgundy from Richard the Justiciary to Reinhard generally bear the single Count title, it would be prudent not to overemphasize these findings as well. From William, the son of Reinhard, onwards, the title of Count of Burgundy reappears. In a number of documents, Wilhelm is refers to himself as Burgundiae Comes, as does his son Raymond. In 1067, Henry IV referred to William as Comes Burgundionum, and his grandson William II was similarly addressed as Comes Burgundia this time. In conclusion, it can be stated that while the territorial form of the Burgundian count title is more prevalent, the ethnic form is also documented, albeit solely as a foreign designation. In the case of the duchy and its rulers, the designation as Burgundian in documentary sources is unambiguous. Until 1075, the territory of the ruling princes was referred to as the Regnum Burgundiae by the princes themselves, by other rulers such as the West Frankish kings or the popes, and in historical texts. Subsequently, it was also known as the Ducatus Burgundiae. The title of Dux Burgundiae first appears in 918 in the aforementioned document by Richard the Justiciary. In the case of Hugh the Black, who otherwise lacked the title of Duke and did not possess any territorial or ethnic extension to his other titles, the designation Dux Burgundionum is also found in royal charters. Ultimately, Henry I is referred to as Dux Burgundionum or Burgundia in both his own and foreign documents, without the simple Dux title disappearing completely at this point. It was under his successors that the Burgundian reference in the ducal title was finally established. However, it should be noted that from Hugh I onwards, the ethnic form disappeared and only the territorial form remained. What approach should be taken to evaluate these testimonies? Luther posited that the term Burgundy employed by the aforementioned Chancellor Hugh of Besançon included both the kingdom and the Duchy of Burgundy. This assertion would be reflected in the historicizing extension of the title of king and chancellor to Rex Burgundionum and Burgundionum Archicancellarius. From this, following Luther, two conclusions could be drawn. Firstly, the ethnic extension of the two titles constituted a clear and deliberate reference to the early medieval Burgundian kingdom. And secondly, this formulates an imagined unity of the now divided territories. Such a view would hardly have been compatible with Henry III's self-image, though, who in 1049 criticized in one of the documents in which he used the ethnically extended Burgundian royal title, so this triple formula, that a donation to Saint Benigne in Dijon had given goods to a church of another realm. Moreover, the Roman king's claim to French territories, inevitably formulated in this way as Luther sees it, would not have been readily accepted by the French king, of course. If one were to accept Luther's argument in its entirety, it would also be necessary to assume that the contemporary use of the title of Dux Burgundionum in the duchy conveyed a claim to represent the entire old Burgundian kingdom. Similarly, Chaume had previously advanced a comparable argument, proposing that the mere ethnic extension of both the Welf royal title and the ducal title up to the 11th century, coupled with their simultaneous independent location within a Regnum Burgundiae, supported the contemporary notion of a single unified Burgundian kingdom. In this, he recognized un nouvel et très fort argument en faveur de la persistance de l'unité morale de la Burgundie. However, it seems more probable that the ethnic addition simply reflected common practice. The Welf kings had already been Regis Burgundionum, and in Henry III's triple title, the Teutonic royal and Roman imperial titles provide the ethnic form alongside the Burgundian one too. The formula Rex or Dux Burgundionum, which may nevertheless have been inspired by the early medieval Burgundians, is therefore less likely to be an explicit reference to the entire realm ruled by them. In contrast, it is more probable that this is a simple designation as king or duke of the contemporary inhabitants of the realm, in a similar manner to Henry being emperor of the Romans. It seems unlikely that the reason for the change of the chancellor's title under Ermenfried of Sillon to Cancellarius Burgundiae from the ethnic addition can be attributed to an emphasis on the status of the kingdom of Burgundy as part of the Salian Empire due to the omission of the reference to the independent Burgundian kingdoms, as Luther assumed. In addition to the fact that this conclusion is based on the previous assumption and that one should be cautious about drawing sweeping conclusions from only a single and very isolated source, both titles of the chancellors are only attested in one charter each, it is difficult to reconcile with the circumstances of the time. Henry IV, as I said, was generally less present in Burgundy than his father and was only able to rely on the Alpine region and the county of Burgundy, particularly during the period of the investiture dispute. Indeed, the disappearance of the title of Rex Burgundionum in particular, which was entirely abolished and not transformed into Rex Burgundiae, can also be attributed to a decline in the importance of the kingdom in the view of Henry. In addition, one could also think of an adaptation to the title of the Dukes of Burgundy, which at first increasingly and then from Hugh I onwards, and that is to say immediately before the time of Ermenfried's chancellorship, was exclusively territorial. Two general conclusions can be drawn at first. In the context of contemporary historiography, both dominions could be characterized as Burgundian. However, it was also possible to either actively or passively deny this character or to emphasize it in relation to the other. Additionally, there was a geographical term that could be of varying size depending on the context and author, and which could encompass parts of both dominions or their entirety, or even more actually. The examples presented thus demonstrate that the notion of a unified Burgundian identity, at least within the context of the 10th and 11th centuries, is untenable. Furthermore, it is not a particularly fruitful avenue of inquiry, in my opinion. While there are indeed texts in Burgundy itself that view both territories within the broader Burgundian space as equally Burgundian in character, such as the Chronicle of Saint-Benigne in Dijon, these instances represent a minor view. An examination of the work of Radulfus Glava, which was also produced in Burgundy, or other sources reveal a more nuanced picture. Furthermore, these sources, also sources like the Chronicle of Saint-Benigne, are distinguished by a distinctive cross-border context. The Abbey of Saint-Benigne was not only situated within the territory of the duchy, but also in Dijon, which was a principal town under the control of the Duke. Concurrently, however, the Counts of Burgundy, in particular Otto William and Reinald, who were closely associated with the dukes and frequently stayed at their court, were among the abbey's most significant benefactors. Their donations were ultimately also confirmed by the contemporary kings of Burgundy, which goes a long way explaining the specific perspective of the abbey's chronicle. In general, only those territories that were relevant to the respective reporting authority were treated at all and labeled as Burgundian, as is evident from basically all the examples. Similar observations also apply to the corresponding references that can be found in the diplomatic sources for a supposedly pan-Burgundian sense of unity. If, for example, Count Letald is presumed to have been referred to as Comes Burgundiae for his possessions on both sides of the Saône, this is due to two factors. Firstly, it is a consequence of the specific historical situation, which was characterized by a weak wealth royal power in the Besançon area. Secondly, it is a result of Letald's own sphere of activity, which regularly crossed political borders. The fact that both rulers, kings and dukes, perceived and portrayed themselves as Burgundian, especially from the 11th century onwards, does not necessarily indicate a sense of community or a common identity. Rather, it can be seen as a sign of active competition in this field and an assertion of the Burgundian character of their own rule. It is only possible to establish a consistent geographical concept of Burgundy that encompasses both dominions. Nevertheless, the extent to which this can be used to infer pan-Burgundian identity based on this common geographical anchoring is highly questionable. Finally, it is evident that there is a distinct reluctance to ascribe the geographical marker Burgundy to the other dominion, as evidenced by sources both written inside and outside Burgundy. The unequivocal repudiation of Burgundian identity, particularly from the Western Frankish perspective towards the Welf Kingdom, serves to refute the notion of a unified consciousness. This is where the paucity of Upper Burgundian narrative sources is most evident and regrettable, although those from the Empire can provide some respite from the Salian takeover onwards. To a certain extent, these findings corroborate the impression conveyed by the French testimonies, which should not be overstated, though, due to their lack of interest in the concerns of the duchy. The instances in which a definitive and impartial categorization as Burgundian was established are also distinguished by the attempt to demarcate the two domains or even to differentiate between them conceptually. One need only cite the division into Burgundia superior and inferior, or the designation of Count Reinhard as transon comites in the Gesta Normanorum as illustrative examples. Luther's thesis and other contemporary research testify to the aforementioned endeavor to substantiate a pervasive sense of cohesion encompassing the Burgundian space, as already did Schoen's hypotheses before them. However, as has been demonstrated, I hope this assertion cannot be substantiated with definitive proof or even tangible evidence. For example, the fact that various bishops, as Luther tried to show, who supposedly all perceived themselves as Burgundian, work together, does not necessarily indicate that each of them also perceived all others as equally Burgundian, or that they also would have used this marker for their group. The absence of corroborating sources that could be used to substantiate this explicitly Burgundian group identity suggests the opposite. Nevertheless, the examples of Hugh the Black and the Counts of Burgundy in the 10th century provide evidence of both collaboration across territorial boundaries and a shared identification as Burgundian, potentially extending even to the territories of both sides of the Saône. A comparison with the narrative sources once more demonstrates that the existence of this Burgundian self-image, which encompassed both the duchy and the kingdom, is therefore rather implausible. In particular, the denial of the Burgundian character of the kingdom in the works of Flodoard and Adolphus Glaber, as well as the frequently discernible endeavors to delimit the two dominions, testify to a clear awareness of difference that was not based solely on political affiliations, as one can often read. In light of the aforementioned evidence, a certain degree of skepticism is warranted with regard to the question of a pan-Burgundian identity, as well as the assumption of a greater area that was also perceived as such by those operating within its purported framework. To come to an end, then, it can be posited that Amatus was in all probability alluding to a more general geographical area than a specific dominion, namely Burgundia in its entirety, and maybe even neighboring regions, which could encompass both the duchy and the territories of the kingdom. Thank you very much for the attention, and I hope I could get some questions or comments if you like.
Thank you very much to you, dear Mats, for this presentation, so compelling, in which all the difficulties of working with geographical labels based on ambiguous ethnic names in the early Middle Ages can be observed. And as you have shown, both parchments and chronicles show very different and changing realities, no? With the same name, no? Behind the mask of Burgundy, some realities so different are completely protected, no? Under the label. So someone wants to break the ice and begin with the questions and comments, as you can see in the PowerPoint.
Everything's clear.
There are no questions. There are no comments. I can't believe it. Okay, I will do this kind of thing of breaking the ice with my question to give time to people to think on the comments on your paper. While I was watching your PowerPoint and hearing your words, I was thinking on the late antique label, no? Burgundy or the ethnic label Burgundians. So have you ever noticed in your research through the works, through the prose of the post-Carolingian intellectuals, quotations to the Burgundians, indeed, that have to do with such an antiquarian taste to remember the late antique Burgundians for their warriors' qualities or for their military leadership to in some ways embraced or to embed their contemporary Burgundian kings or aristocrats?
Only, it's a very interesting question, and I thought about that myself because I was actually thinking that I should find something like that. But it's actually only the case in very few instances. And actually, it's more when it gets more specialized. For example, these the term superiore Burgundia, that's often connected to descriptions of the region of Gallia in a more specialized manner. For example, they call it the Burgundia Superior. The Chronicle of Saint Benigni calls the Burgundia Superior the Gallia Comata, which is the part of Gallia that Caesar had to conquer. And there you find citations from Orosius, for example, and from other late antique texts. But in the case of the Burgundians or Burgundy, it's very seldom actually. It's more the points of reference, to me at least, seem to be more the Burgundian kingdoms of the Merovingians and then the region in the Carolingian Empire. In the cases where you can even talk about that, mostly it's just like a marker that is used, like Aquitaine, for example, also.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's really interesting to search about in which ways the lay intellectuals of the royal and comital chancelleries within the parchments evoke those ancient landscape to create or to invent new political constructions, new political architectures, which are so linked intellectually, with a very distant past, which is rooted in late antiquity. It's rooted in the former Roman Empire and its successor states. So I'm really interested in that kind of questions and
exactly that can be seen with the Gallia Comata, for example. That's exactly what you are describing. But with Burgundy, it's always presupposed by research almost that this should be the case, but you can't actually read it into the sources that we have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other questions, please? Other questions? Okay. Alexandru Stefan Anca.
A colleague of mine.
Yeah, please, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome. A question regarding to Amatus of Monte Cassino.
Yeah.
When he's talking about Burgundians, does it mean people from a distinct region or just others? There were Normans, there were Franks, and others.
Yeah. That's actually a very fascinating question, and I have thought about that too. And to me, it seems that both could be the case actually, because he says he's not only talking about the Burgundians but also the French, and of course the Normans, who play the pivotal role in his report. Of course, they are the ones who lead the army actually, and the others take part as a kind of add-on. But the point that makes me question this theory is that he also says the others again. But you could very well say that he wanted to describe like a very large group and a very diverse group. And therefore he said the Normans, of course, and then the French, because that was like the bigger brother, so to speak. And then he wanted another region to complete this. Or one could also think about, Amatus is writing around 1080, and the conquest of Bastro is already 1064. And in that period in between, we actually do have solid evidence for Burgundian intervention on the Iberian Peninsula. So it could be that he was actually referring to what was normal at his own time, that Burgundians took part in the fights against the Moors on the Iberian Peninsula, and was transporting that to the conquest of Barbastro too. So that's also actually like an aspect that you need to consider when interpreting Amatos. I actually just wanted to use it as like this, upfront, very very easy way of starting, because it's so clear that he doesn't really think about who Burgundians are, because he really never mentions them again. I searched it, and that's the only time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. There are no other questions, comments. Please, some questions, some comment. The paper was so clearly explained, which is obviously self-explanatory.
Yeah, to be honest, it's very far already in the process. That maybe that's the problem. Maybe.
No. It's never a problem. It's normal, no, to follow a seminar and not to bring much food for knowledge. So it's normal. Well, if there are no more questions, I will adjourn the session and refer you to our next date, which will be in January the 14th, with a paper delivered by Alicia Rodriguez. And then thank you all for being here, and thank you, Mats, for your paper, which was very, very interesting and which is very, very compelling. So thank you very much again. And
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to you all for being here with us in this new Connecta moment, in this new Connecta seminar. Thank you very much, and see you next year in January.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you very much.